To continue, comprehension skills that we worked on are shown on the reading comprehension skills chart over here. We worked a lot on comparing and contrasting texts and perspectives, checking the validity of sources, or making sure that when a student has an opinion, they can support it, just like the supporting the claims with text evidence. Reflecting on what they learned and what they read, and also listening to each other's ideas was another big part of our quality talk. Our vocabulary practice came into key whenever we were practicing not only vocabulary in the text, but as well as grade level spelling words, as well as sight words for students that were working at a lower level. And summarizing the text was also another important thing, talking about the main idea, key details, and story elements. With the vocabulary development, we used the third grade curriculum spelling words, like I said, but students in my lower group used first to second grade sight words. I could have used higher words for groups 4 and 5, but our graded spelling expectations were to complete the third grade spelling words. But in my next steps, that is something that I could do, is use more challenging versions of the spelling patterns that we're working on for that week. Other concepts that we worked on in whole group lessons were transferred into small group texts and associated sample texts with response pages, such as these comprehension skills. The weekly goals and objectives I listed here that were on my lesson plans, one of which was the students will answer 5 out of 5 comprehension questions correctly about the level text by the final weekly session. So each week at the third or fourth session, whichever it would be, the students would do a comprehension practice that sometimes happened in the middle of the week, depending on when they finished their text, or chapter, depending on the group. The second goal would be for students to discuss newly identified vocabulary within a minimum of 8 to 10 correct uses of the words and written sentences by the end of the weekly session. I used a vocabulary page for this practice and a spelling test, essentially, for my students in my lowest group. These are some informal surveys of the students' opinions that I took. The first survey on the left was after groups were established, and the students, most of them, scored between the 3 and 5, which is more liked than disliked. So I have my students do fist to 5. So they close their eyes and put their heads down so that their views aren't skewed by others, and they can honestly answer without feeling like they're being judged or anything. So they put their head down, close their eyes, and show me just a fist to 5. I tell them a fist, you don't like it at all, or it's very hard, and a 5 is you love it, you could do it every day, you would do it every day in your sleep. So some of them made comments on, such as they liked working together, they enjoyed the pace of the station learning models, and they gave some feedback, as well as they wanted new spelling activities, or they wished the time was longer. They really liked helping each other read, and they liked being able to have new, interesting books. They did, at that time, like using Raz and Epic, which were a few of the other stations that were not teacher stations. From their feedback, some of them also said that the activities seemed to be too repetitive. They liked doing other activities for spelling instead of the same thing. So I adjusted the setup of my groups and included a variety of activities that would change from week to week. As many students mentioned that they were too repetitive, though some would stay the same, such as Raz, because it is a school-wide expectation, and the teacher groups, because that is where I do my literacy circle, and I gain a lot of my qualitative data, such as observations. So those stayed the same. I did change my spelling to a sparkle game that they played, which is something that they love, taking turns. Each of them says a letter until the word is spelled. And then they also practice just writing, rainbow writing, and quizzing each other, other than just the flashcards, matching the flashcards with the definitions. I also took the suggestion of partner reading over independent reading to practice oral fluency even more so in the students' texts. The most recent survey after the groups is on the right side, and it concluded much higher ratings between 3 and 5 only. There were no 0s to 2s. So that felt really good to know that not only are they learning, and hopefully we are closing that reading achievement gap within my class, but the students are enjoying the hands-on activities and they are engaged. So I really enjoyed listening to their suggestions and feedback. The one thing that was brought up a lot was that picking who goes first in the groups that I'm not in is difficult, and I suggested using rock, paper, scissors, which usually goes well. My students actually, when it came to each reading group, I observed that they all wanted to read first, and in the beginning of our groups, sorry, I'm skipping ahead to reflection, but in the beginning of our groups, the students weren't raising their hand to go first, so their confidence level in reading orally skyrocketed. They talked about how they could focus on reading out loud, and they liked working as a group better than by themselves because their partner can help them. They get to build up their reading level, and not everyone was pleased, but they are much overall happier with the way the stations went, as was I, because I was seeing their growth. So this is the first post-assessment analysis. This is for the Fast Bridge Learning A reading test. The scores are on the right. So 16 out of 18, or 90% of students, their independent reading level increased by at least one instructional level, according to the next steps guided assessment, which you can see here on the right where it says final. The rubric is on the left with a minimum requirement of meeting. So the Next Steps Assessment Conference took into account the students' oral reading fluency, ability to summarize the text, and 5 comprehension questions about the text. So they had to perform at a certain level for their instructional level to be between a K and an O, which in the end, all of my students were performing at an emerging or above grade level. According to FastBridge and Next Steps, 90% of my students are on grade level or above for reading level performance, and 10% of students are performing at a 3rd grade level, but not far behind their peers. That just means they're performing more like a beginning 3rd grade level, with only 0.5 students performing at a 2nd grade reading level. So going back to my FastBridge reading, these are the students. The color identifies the group they were in, not the meets, approaching, emerging, or below expectations standard that my district uses. But every single student either increased by 1 or more points. I don't think there were any students that stayed the same. I was very impressed with them in their final assessments. So here are some quotes that I got from my students. I really like working together. I really like reading groups a lot because I can focus on reading out loud, and I really like taking turns reading and the beach ball thingy, which was our comprehension. Looking back, I originally had a paper quiz, but the students weren't handling that as well, and honestly, when I switched to the comprehension beach ball, they were able to answer almost every single question correctly in a fun and engaging way, and they could add on to each other's answers as they were to get the beach ball and land on the same thinking stem or question. Overall, students showed substantial growth in reading and comprehension strategy abilities. I was able to produce engaging and age-appropriate activities. Students reacted positively and spoke about their love for small group time. They often would groan if I said we weren't getting to small groups. Like on a Monday, we would do it the next 4 days. Or they would be sad when it was over and it was time to move on to science. So it was really great to see that I was fostering 11 reading for them and with them, and they were building on their comprehension strategies all at the same time. I really learned to gauge the students' progress and determine what I needed to add to an assessment to better help them develop their reading skills. If I noticed they were having trouble with finding the problem in a story, we might have to go back and reread. Or work on it again next time, when I originally planned to work on citing evidence in the text. So I had to be flexible within my groups, but there was a lot of informal qualitative data that was going on. in the observations I had with each group, as well as the quality talk that we were doing. Sorry. So my next steps would be considering student reflections and suggestions, and even changing my groups even more, reassessing the necessary literacy skills based on the newest assessments I have. So if my students have leveled up, I could adjust my groups, which is something that I plan to do, and continue to watch my students grow. So I not only adjust the text that the students are working on. So for example, in the picture, this group is on a level O. I would increase that to a P, and then see how the students are doing with the text, if it's not too frustrating, if it's challenging enough. And the students are able to 5 to 5 gauge that for me just in the moment as well. There were a lot of teachable moments that I used within the small groups that I really enjoyed, and the students did, because they were very beneficial and meaningful to them. So my groups may adjust by students moving up. I do not have any students that would be moving into lower groups, which is a win and shows success in the results of the research. In conclusion, I just put the same research question: how does the use of engaging strategies within level groups help students to progress their reading performance or instructional level? But in conclusion, I found that the answer to my research question was that students progress positively when it comes to their reading performance with fluency. Students were able to read aloud with little to no help at the end of guided reading groups, and each student progressed between 1 and 4 levels on their reading comprehension conferences with the Next Steps guided reading assessments. Finally, using engaging strategies within level groups did lead to their progressive performances of comprehension and instructional levels of text. Here are my resources. Overall, I would continue doing groups every single year, and honestly, I plan to, now that I've finished this class and been challenged to dig deeper into the groups other than just throwing out worksheets here and there. The hands-on activities really help my students to not only become closer with their peers and myself, but I got to know my students more, and I could really gauge what they needed and then adapt my lesson plans to reflect what they needed to work on it. Whether they would be ready for a transfer lesson or not, I could pause that and move that to the next day. So overall, in conclusion, the use of engaging strategies within leveled groups helped my students to progress their reading performance and instructional level. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys soon.